Hello everyone, and welcome back to our video series for The Lightning Thief, the Percy Jackson musical here at Playhouse Square in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm here with Tesia Benson, who is the costume designer for the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely, no problem.
Yeah. So I'd love to get into what is your exact role in this situation for the show?
Oh, in this particular situation?
Yes.
So for this production, I'm serving as the costume designer. So that means I need to determine all of the looks of all of the clothes that everybody's wearing. But also because of the nature of how it's produced, I also will be doing some of the craft work. And then along with an assistant doing some alterations and things like that. So it's important as a costume designer to be able to understand how things go together at the same time, right? Because a lot of times you're doing things that are hands-on. So with this show, I get to be more hands-on, which is a lot of fun.
What are some of the first steps that you do when you begin to design a show?
Sure. Well, so obviously the thing that would make most sense, right, is you read the script, which is kind of not a very exciting step to take, right? Well, I think it is exciting because you're like, yeah, I'm going to start this project, right? So, of course, those kind of initial steps of reading the script for pleasure and then doing more close readings of the script. But for costume design, really the first step is research. For most areas of design, the first thing is research, and a lot of that goes back to looking at source material or looking up images of how people dress themselves and present themselves in the world. And so on this show, we've really had the opportunity to delve in a little bit more into youth culture and see how people are choosing to present themselves right now, because we wanted to create something that felt current versus it has to be exactly this one thing that we've all imagined the same way, because the story itself is so interesting.
Yeah. What were some of those first source inspirations for you when you started?
Well, oddly enough, the first thing we started talking about were the monster elements of the play, because two of the first most impactful moments are when Mrs. Dodds grows, well, spoiler alert, Mrs. Dodds grows wings, and then we see a minotaur shortly thereafter. And Chris and I, the director, and I were talking, and one of the things that we really thought was important for the show was to make this idea of that it felt like this world could be cobbled together from other things, right? And that we didn't want everything to look really polished and like a perfect thing like you could have happen in a movie, because of the difference between movie and live theater. And so the first thing was actually all of this kind of cardboard sculpture that was really interesting to us. Now, in the process, I'm actually not doing as much of those creations. Some of those things have moved over to the scenic and props elements, but that kind of informed all of the choices after that. Going, okay, this world is made out of things that you might find in the garage or you might find in the attic, and how do we create that together and finish it with your imagination?
You mentioned the cardboard and how it's not exactly like a movie. So what are some of your overall stylistic goals with this production?
I think we want the audience to be able to see themselves in the characters. We want them to be able to identify those parts of those characters who go, there's something about me that doesn't feel like I fit in with everyone else. So we want those characters to look very relatable on stage. We don't want to make them so perfect, polished, like sometimes a musical can be presented, right? We want to have that roughness. And so I think the cardboard also is part of that, where you go, oh, well, cardboard isn't perfect, but you can make it look something perfect, right? So I think really the inspiration is about looking at real people in life and trying to draw inferences between that and the characters that we're designing here.
Is there something that audiences can expect to see the individuality in some of these characters coming out in their costumes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you'll see it right away when you see the individual trios, and if you know anything about the play or about the book or the play already, you know, like Annabeth is pretty, uptight individual who's really prepared all of the time, right? And so that's reflected in her costume with lots of straight lines and things that are maybe a little more closely fitted or more utilitarian. So, I mean, that's the fun part to me about doing a show that's more modern dress. So sometimes modern dress gets a bad rap, right? Because costume designers are like, well, I want to design something that's fantasy, or I want to design something that's period, because that requires a different kind of approach, and modern clothes can feel more boring. But to me, modern clothes are really exciting because we all make a choice when we wake up in the morning to put something on our body, right? We all choose to say something about ourselves, and the things that we're attracted to are instantly reflecting something inside of us. And so I like to find those small storytelling moments within that. So we just had a long conversation after looking at fitting photos about one of the characters, whether or not they're a high contrast character or a monotone character, and how we'll use the color to express them that way.
So for someone watching at home who might be interested in getting into costume design, what are some of the skills that they should start practicing?
Well, I think the first thing, and I don't know if it's necessarily a skill, maybe more an attribute, but I think if you want to be in the design field in any live production or even in film, the first thing you really need to have is a sense of curiosity. You have to want to know why people do what they do, and you have to be curious about how people you don't know are presenting themselves to the world, right? And so for me, the basis of all design is curiosity, and not just being satisfied by what you're comfortable with or being satisfied by what is familiar, but wanting to know other things outside of your own realm, right? Because you so frequently are telling stories of people that you understand things about, but there's things about the characters that you aren't going to relate to, right? There's always going to be a character maybe you don't like very much and you have to make a choice for them too, right? I also think it's really important to have a familiarity with the history of clothing. I mean, for me, as a kid, I was pretty dorky, and the big deal was to go to the library, right? And so, I don't think it's that normal for a 10 or 12-year-old to be checking out costume history books and copying everything, right? So that was probably the first inclination. But that was clear that this was what I was going to be. But I think that's an important thing, too. You have to have a sense of wanting to know what clothes are doing, not just being interested in fashion that's happening right now, because I think that's slightly different. If that's what you're into, you're probably more going to be going towards being a stylist. And that's its own art form, right? And I think you have to want to know, you want to be interested in learning text. You want to be someone who's interested in storytelling, because it's not just making clothes, it's about supporting that text with the visual storytelling of what you're putting on stage. And making sure that you've expressed the characters well together, but that they create a holistic stage picture on their own next to each other, that they go together on some level. And then I think there's also the intangibles. I think it's really important for costume designers to have sewing skills. Because if you walk into a shop and you have really awesome ideas and you can draw really well, which is great, but the drawing is just a communication, you need to know what you're talking with another person who's going to help you make this thing. And so if you know how to do that, that's important too. So curiosity, which leads into learning about things, being interested in telling stories, and then getting some sewing skills under your belt. But I think if you're coming to school to do that, just curiosity is enough. The rest you can be taught. You don't have to teach yourself all of it on YouTube, unless that's your thing.
And I ask everyone this at the end of our interviews, but what's your favorite part of the show?
I don't know, because I think the favorite part of the show develops for me as I start to see the actors bring the characterization. It's really the pre-production part is essential and a big part of the work of design, but I really love, and I guess this is less about the actual show itself, I love the fitting process. I love the part where you have the conversation with the actor and you say, well, I know what I chose and what Chris and I talked about, but within this framework, what have you learned about this character living in their skin for the last couple weeks in a way that I haven't really lived in their skin in that way, and having that kind of collaborative thing. So for me, I very rarely have a favorite scene in a show or a favorite song. My favorite part of a show is the experience of collaborating with other people, because the rest of it is so ephemeral to me, but the consistency is that you always get to have collaboration, and that's what's important to me.
Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bryce. Thanks for asking.